Hello, everyone. Welcome to this session from Future of London's Learning from Crisis series. I'm Lisa Taylor. I'm Executive Director at Future of London and Director of Coherent Cities, and we're delighted to have you. In the background off screen, but at least as critical, are FOLs Ollie Pinch, Sophie Nellis, and Kana Namoto, who will make sure things run smoothly and try and help you if you get into trouble. I'm seeing lots of names I know and lots of newcomers in the audience, which is what we want to see. We love a mix of new and established members. And today is really important. Just as people filter in, I'll do a little bit of tech. We are 17 people in the core roundtable group today. You have the choice of watching all of us by choosing gallery in the top right of your screen, or you can go one at a time by watching speaker view. We also, the focus is on the group that you can see on your screen now. You are very welcome to use the chat to ask questions, to raise points. Please share links if you have them about ways that we can all act and work together. If you want to ask the group something, put your question to everyone and I'll keep an eye on that and I'll ask it on your behalf. I don't know how much time we'll have, but we'll make sure we do that. If you drop out, just use the link you had before. If it's full when you come back, you're very welcome to go to the YouTube channel that's live streaming now, and we're recording it for later, so you can also see that later. If you're on Twitter, we are #LearningFromCrisis. That's capital L, capital F, capital C, so that text readers can pick that up. And we are at Future of LDN, plus all of the, the usernames of everybody on this great call. Learning from Crisis, the overall program, is really true to Future of London's USP in that it's about sharing best practice across sectors. It's about bringing up next wave and operational leaders and not just top tier, so a nice mix of both. It's about diversity in thought and action as well as in representation, because we think we need all of those to work together. This particular one is also tied to Future of London's Diversity Speaker Network, which Seth, actually, who's on the group today, helped me set up 5 years ago. The point of it is to start having more people who are from underrepresented groups on platforms so that young people see someone who looks or sounds like them on the stage and talking about urban ideas. We also, as part of that, provide free presentation coaching so that if you're someone from any kind of minority group who wants to speak but isn't sure, we can help you build confidence and skills. There's information on all of that after the fact. The other thing this relates to is a new program, an initiative that Future of London's doing with the G15 housing group and Altair called Emerging Talent. That's about broadening the talent pool going into housing, but also helping to develop and progress people a bit better than we're doing now. And finally, the last kind of tie-in with this one is our own leadership programs and alumni group. There are 500 alumni as of this year. They're moving up into more senior roles and on big projects across the country. There's some of them in this group here and many of you in the audience. I keep an eye on this group because they're all purpose-driven, and I think it's a really good alliance to make. In terms of where we're going today, this session was brought up because there's people just being shut off quietly in the background. If your audio is on, please turn it off unless you're speaking. We'll go find whoever that is. The session we're doing today is about, obviously, the inequality and trying to find equality. If someone can, we're going to mute Sam. There we are. We're just going to mute Sam. That's better. Right. Back to it. Coronavirus and the lockdown have really exacerbated and highlighted some of the serious long-term inequalities that we've been seeing across the sector. Things about employment, health, safety, food security, access to broadband is a new one. And we've been watching that happen over time. And then with the murder of George Floyd and the resurgence and reinvigoration of the Black Lives Matter movement, it's just been two kind of big knocks on the door saying, wake up, this is the time. We're in this weird pause right now. Why not really make equality the new normal? Now, Future of London, me, we're not a fan of just talking shops for their own sake. So again, please, anyone in the audience, if you've got links to share, ways to get things done, share those in the chat. Use the write-up after the fact, because out of this session, we want to challenge you in the audience to make some kind of personal commitment to what you're going to do. And then also to commit maybe to how you can help to push the sector to change more. So it's not just about us here, it's about you guys as well. The group we've got today is amazing. I'll introduce them really briefly as they go around and talk about what's what. But as I say, after the roundtable, the write-up is quite key. Before we get going, I do want to thank the sponsors of the Diversity Network. It's really hard to get money for diversity. And that's one of the main problems that all of you face. I think budget for diversity has been woefully underspent, and hopefully it'll come up. But L&Q has stepped up, and Norse Group, NPS Group, Marina is here today, has stepped up. She and I had a great chat about why she bothers to do this. And Marina, I'm going to hand over to you just to sort of let us know why are you investing in this?
Thank you, Lisa. Hello, everyone. My name is Marina Robertson, and I'm a senior director in the NPS Group, as Lisa said, which is the property arm of the Norse Group. The Norse Group is the largest local authority company in the UK. Now, this fact is interesting, and not just because it's an opportunity to talk about our company, despite how much we love to do so. Like other companies, we adhere to rules of competition. Our DNA, however, as a business, is very much in the public sector. We deliver projects for local authorities, but we also care to do so in a way that brings about lasting change, whether it's schools or homes or libraries or museums. And this is the real reason behind our support for the Diversity Network. We see championing diversity as the only way to achieve a progressive and sustainable future for business and society, where everyone has the freedom to just be themselves, breaking free from the straitjackets of stereotypes. And I'm saying this as a Greek woman. In the last
Thank
few
you,
months,
Marina.
If the last few months have taught us anything, it's how much stronger we are together and how much more resilient we become by looking after each other. More than that, our economy simply cannot afford to not be diverse. In the next months and years, we need to squeeze every last drop of talent to support our economy. And talent resides in all types of bodies, beliefs, and likes. Finally, I will end my short introduction by leaving you with an interesting and I think staggering fact. Research has shown, McKinsey in 2017, that companies with the most ethnically diverse executive teams were more likely to outperform their peers by as much as 33%. As you can see, there is a moral, there is a social, but also an economic argument for diversity, and now more than ever. Anyway, enough from me. We have some brilliant people joining us today, and I just can't wait to get the conversation started. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, Marina, and thanks for kicking us off with a bit of evidence, the thing everybody needs to make that business case no matter what. I'm going to give it over to Kate Dodsworth to kind of kick off the conversation. Kate is CEO of Gateway Housing, a diversity champion of great repute and a lot of energy that she's found time for us despite everything that's going on now is great. So Kate, what are you seeing these days and what do we need to do next?
Thanks, Lisa, and thanks, Marina, and morning, everybody. I've got everything I need for a Zoom conference. I've got the obligatory work that's going on in the house, which you'll be able to hear. I've got nesting seagulls above me, which hopefully you'll be able to hear. I'm wearing slippers and I've put up a hasty bookshelf. So we've got everything we need. So I've got 5 minutes and I'm gonna absolutely stick to time. Marina, that was really helpful because you've mentioned McKinsey. I was going to come to that. What's been accomplished? I was thinking back to the 1990s, and I did a master's degree in housing when I was at work. And I walked into the library at Southbank University and I picked up a copy of Inside Housing, thumbed through it, and it basically told me that if I was a woman, I would have no chance of being a chief executive in the housing sector world. We tell ourselves we're such a nice sector based in social justice, but we're pretty behind the curve when it comes to diversity. So I think we knocked that one off. I think in work in our sector, we've made great progress in terms of women. I'm not going to pick up on every protected characteristic here, but I think there was a time about 5-6 years ago where we all started to notice all male panels and we'd call it out, and now it looks pretty weird where there is not representation from women and there are much better proportions on boards and in senior levels. LGBT as well. The Stonewall Allies scheme, I think, has been really successful in supporting people in the workplace. Not completely there yet, but a really good example of where people not from that protected group have moved to support people in other protected groups. And that, I think, is a key point for diversity. I would like to see much more speaking up on behalf of other groups. So for me, the intractable issue where we have not made enough progress and still have much more to do is the progression of Black for BAME staff. If you look at the statistics alone in cities, you can expect that households, BAME households will make up 30–40% in cities and at entry level in organisations. That simply isn't projected up to the senior levels, to boards, to exec teams in our sector or frankly in any other public sector. And something is going on there. Call it what you will. I call it racism. There is something, a massive gap which stops people getting to senior levels. So about 4 or 5 years ago, High Leona, BME London Housing Associations, Gina Amo, the Chief Executive of Inquilab, and I would have conversations, and Leadership 2025 was set up with the primary purpose of addressing this issue. So there is the top level development programme for senior leaders in conjunction with Roffey Park, which is great. We're on year 4 now, but beneath the radar has been the pulling of political levers, getting people to support us, getting better representation of Black housing professionals in print and on platform, because the representation matters. And it's great to see now other programmes, Future of London. Lisa, you've always been fantastic on this. You know, we followed you in a lot of respects, but it's good to see that for every stage in people's career now, there is a programme actually dedicated to them. But there is still work to do on leadership for me, and I'll sum up in a moment. The latest stats we've done through Leadership 2025 show some improvement. When we started this, there were only 6% of BAME staff at senior level in exec roles. We've seen some movement, a tiny movement, but that can be explained by some organisations doing this really well, but other organisations doing nothing at all. And then Black Lives Matter happened in this country, or white people started to understand what it was over the last few months. And for me, the light has kind of gone on, but there is much more to do. There's been lots of talk. For me, there's been a few sort of empty corporate statements. It needs to be backed up with leadership. And this is a leadership issue. It is a strategic leadership issue. People get, off on dealing with all things on their risk register. This is flashing red and has been for a long time. And for me, it should not be handed off to the HR or equalities officer. This is a triangulation between the chief executive, the board and exec, and the HR director to grab and get on with it. And thanks, Marina, for mentioning McKinsey, because where it happens, then you get better results across the board. Diverse boards are much better at dealing with risk, making better decisions, and the results will follow. And I'll finish up with a plug for Gateway Housing Association, where we have a reverse gender and ethnicity pay gap, and our resident satisfaction has gone up 9% in the last year, and staff satisfaction up 20% in the last 18 months. So that would bear out McKinsey for me. I'll stop there. I think I've done my 5 minutes, Lisa, haven't I?
That was brilliant. Thanks, Kate. We didn't hear any construction works or seagulls in the background, so nicely managed.
I'm disappointed.
All right, well, we'll come back to you later. Akil, I don't know if you saw in the chat that I was going to come to you next. He's like, oh, yeah. I wanted to ask you, because you've been doing work with councils, as has Seth. I've had a bunch of people in this group, frankly, but you also worked with public practice, which is a way in for people that uses, I think, one of the software apps that's kind of, person blind and so on. I wanted to ask you, kind of related to what Kate said about how do you get in? And I'll ask the second question second, but this idea that, I know you guys, Akil and Seth, you're both like 7 feet tall anyway, of course you're visible, but we see you guys a lot. And I wanted to ask you also, do you feel like there should be more people like you out there? do you feel like you're on stage alone sometimes? So Akil, if you want to start with councils first or with being on stage first, it's up to you.
Cool, well, thank you. I guess in terms of public practice, I think public practice is a really amazing way of getting kind of greater representation and diversity into councils. I think that's one of the kind of leading things of how it's championed, but also it provides that kind of, it's something extra in order to aid rather than to kind of infiltrate a local council. And I think that's really important in how you show solidarity with the aim to do public good, as well as, obviously being visibly there to disrupt and to be visibly there to change the status quo. It's not an easy balance to do. So that's what I would say on the public practice. I think in terms of outside of that, because obviously the public sector exists far outside of public practice, I think how more people like Seth and I work with and also work for councils isn't straightforward, I think. And Seth will back me up on this because he works part-time for a council at the moment. I think it can be quite difficult to, especially coming from backgrounds through which you may feel villainized by local councils, your experience of a local council or local governance might be primarily antagonistic for any number of reasons. How do you then reconcile the need or the belief that you can make change from within that mode of antagonism? And I think that's really not straightforward. A lot of it is to do with demystifying how councils work. I think a lot of the ways in which we attract people from underrepresented backgrounds is to demystify structures, is to fundamentally change structures, not just to kind of sugarcoat and get people into doing the wrong thing. Because that's another question as well. Would you want people in to support work that they don't believe in, or to support work that might genuinely be harmful for them? So I don't know if you want to have anything more to say on that.
Just a quick introduction, because I forgot we didn't introduce ourselves. So I'm Seth, and that's Akil from Resolve Collective, and we're an interdisciplinary design collective that address social issues in the built environment. I think the only thing I'd say to that on like a very practical level about us being visible a lot, I think we were very fortunate in all of the negativity that's happened over the last 4 months. There were a lot of lists being passed around, and those lists, fortunately for us, included us in quite a few of those lists. But I think now that we've, especially within certain industries that might not have been comfortable before, now that we've got comfortable with the idea that there are practitioners who are doing things differently, I think we need to then challenge ourselves to present more people and not to get comfortable with those same faces. So we often try and challenge ourselves to question whether we'd be the right people to be representing this particular issue or cause. And we're always keen to make sure that we recommend other people and make sure that we can continue to kind of grow that network, because I think we could be, if we were lazy and if we were kind of got a bit short-sighted, we would just take this and kind of run with it and be the face of something. But that's not really our aim. We're not aiming to be the face of anything. We just want to continue what we do and delivering the work that we do. And we want to also promote other people and ensure that other people get the opportunity to speak as well.
Thanks, Seth. I think the point you make is interesting too. I mean, one, I do some of the presentation coaching, and I'll say to people on it, get in the room. For someone of color, woman, whatever, if you're getting invited, and it's because you're the woman or whatever, if you have something to say on that topic, take it. But if you don't have something to say on that topic and they're asking you about, structural engineering, and you're obviously token, don't waste your time. Be strategic about where you show up. I think that's really important. I wanted to go in that vein in terms of looking beyond your own group and helping to have a network that connects other people. I'm going to go to Anita, who works with Future GM, and then also I'm going to go to Anouk after that from Women. So Anita, what's your thinking on terms of spreading out and finding people who can speak to a topic?
I think you have to just put yourself out there, and when you get opportunities, you have to take them. I think, as you've just said, Lisa, I think part of it is about leadership, taking their younger staff or their females or whatever protected characteristic it may be to various networking events or to a dinner or to client meetings. But it's also about those people who are minorities. I think we're all aware that we do have to work a little bit harder. It's about yourselves taking the initiative to get out there, spread yourself in as many networks as possible, make those connections. If you see somebody who's charismatic or you think has got potential, I think it's about taking note of them and having them in the back of your mind. I think much like Akil and Seth were saying, and being able to put those people forward as well in those networks for speaking opportunities or whatever that might be.
Okay, thanks for that. Anouk, I'm going to ask you the same sort of question, and then I promise we'll get off the speaker platform thing. I know it's what we do. Anouk, I'm going to ask you about basically this idea of finding interesting people of different ethnicities and genders, et cetera, et cetera. How do you see that in your role with Real Estate Women sort of translating into action? Do you see sort of outcomes coming from that?
Yes, we hope to. So Surrealism Women has been a women's network for the past 8 years, and we've just been about women as a whole. But given COVID and the disparities and the inequalities that are showing through, and specifically with BLM, we've decided to be much more proactive about engaging consciously. It's not just going to come without us doing nothing, but actually engaging consciously, inviting people from an ethnic background and BAME and BLM to come and speak for us, to create content on their successes, on their challenges. So because we have a wide platform, we've got over 1,000 followers, over 800 subscribers, 500 paid members. We've worked with corporate across the property industry. So we feel we have a responsibility that's not just about sitting back and saying, yes, we're about women, but actually now challenging the status quo. And I think that's really why we're here. We can't just sit back, and for leaders and for government. There was an article by BBC yesterday, the government is not doing enough. So this is why these forums are important, and for us to take a stand and to say, look, we need to do work for us. So Maria and I, and as a group, we are bringing in many more people. We are creating roundtables, and it's really through action, not just through words.
Yeah, and I like the fact that you don't have sessions that talk about diversity. They talk about issues that are germane, but with people you might not otherwise see, which is what I said to everyone in the audience today. If you don't know the people on your screen right now, you will, because they're all amazing. On that note, Kelly, just a sort of a plug for you. Kelly Canterford, Changing the Face of Property. The same thing, you have a network, but you're also heading into this sort of thornier territory of HR, wage gaps, and so on. Can you tell us a bit about what you're doing that you think is working and how you do that?
Yeah, I think a lot of the progress that we've made is to have an open forum. So so the Changing the Face Property is 12 of the UK, 12 UK real estate companies, and it's a combination of the CEOs of those businesses recognising the need to change, the HRs and the D&I reps of those then coming together and discussing what we're doing, how we can hold each other accountable. And it is very much about how we can each hold the other business to account. So, and the great thing about real estate is whether we like it or not, we're all competitive. You look at the Stonewall Workplace Equality Index, one business gets in, you can see everybody's feathers bristling of, okay, how can we do this? How can we create change? So I think that's where we have a benefit. But in terms of what we're doing with the HR, we're sharing the different initiatives. So we've got Knight Frank, who are talking about their program at the moment, where they're holding the partners, there's a whole training going across their business. And it's recognised that we're doing that through JLL, Savills, Cushman's, all of these businesses saying, yeah, we're doing the same. What's working, what's not working. And I think that's the strength that we can garner from having HR people in the room. But also we need to acknowledge that HR and diversity and inclusion are two very different things. And we need to take the expertise from a D&I expert and apply that to HR, who can then roll it out through the business.
Actually, I was just saying to Vicki Thompson, who is an HR director, that I was going to come to her in a few minutes after building all this evidence, but that question goes directly to what you do about D&I versus HR. I know you were in the legal profession before, and now you're in property. What do you think about the distinction? Does that resonate for you, and how are you making progress?
Well, I have to say, when I arrived less than a year ago from legal into property, I had a few kind of moments coming from a highly regulated, risk-averse environment into property. I was a little bit surprised actually how behind we were. So it's sort of trying to absorb what was going on and how we tackle this. And that's internally, but also externally and collectively, and how as an industry are we all sort of working towards this, and actually sort of trying to, you know, the kind of, oh, women don't go into property, it's just not acceptable, and actually trying to sort of dig beneath that and work out what's going on. So I do think there's a difference. I do think HR is a powerful tool. We're a facilitator and we can make things happen, particularly in the partnership environment. So you know, when I joined, I asked our senior leaders, what are your priorities? What do you want from HR? And every single one replied D&I. You will know, we are, you know, within our profit sharing group, it's all white men. So there's a real appetite to change. So I think HR works very closely with the D&I committee, and in fact everybody, we've got a next gen committee, an associate committee, in fact I can see some of them logged on, who have a huge appetite to make a change. So I see my role very much as facilitating that, not doing it for them, but facilitating that to tackle an issue collectively.
Okay, thanks for that. As we said in the pre-conversation, I've warmed to Montague Evans because I know there's a lot of willingness and the levels that are rising up. And I've also met some amazing women inside that firm who are hopefully moving up. It's a question of potentially accelerating that. Thanks, Vicky. We'll come back to you on that later. There was a question that came up before about, Kelly brought up about diversity versus inclusion, which is a big deal. You know, is someone actually on the list and hired, but do they just sort of not have tasks to live over there? I want to go to Diane Lightfoot. Let us know in the audience, you know, what you do, and then how do you address that question? How do you go beyond just being in the room to being fully involved for disabled people?
Thank you very much, Lisa. Yes, so I'm Diane Lightfoot and I am Chief Executive of a membership organisation, a small charity called Business Disability Forum. And we work with over 300 businesses across a whole range of sectors, but including construction and housing and local authorities, and support them to get better at recruiting and retaining disabled employees, and also at serving disabled customers. And the first thing I guess around disability is that in diversity, it is still often the poor relation, and it's the one that people sort of park in the too difficult box. And one of the things that I would say when trying to reframe that is it's actually part of the human condition, and getting people to understand the breadth of disability, and also the fact that over 90% of disabilities and conditions are not immediately visible. So firstly, it's very, very likely that you're already employing, working alongside, and of course know socially, people who have a disability that you're not even aware of. So I think it really goes down to the cultural piece, which I think we'll probably explore a bit more. And having a diverse workforce is great, but actually feeling you belong, and this is somewhere where someone like me fits and is welcomed, and where you can talk openly about the support that you might need and maybe some of the barriers that you are facing, is absolutely critical. And I think there are some opportunities actually post-COVID in kind of reimagining what works looks like, and keeping more of a mixed economy of work. So rather than all sliding back into let's all go back to the office Monday, Friday, 9 till 5, keeping that blended approach, which actually can make it so much easier for people, not just disabled people, but to manage work and life, and to have access to a whole range of opportunities and enter the workforce or not fall out of it. And I think as well, that whole thing around senior leadership and role modelling. So as with other protected characteristics, actually, we know that the further you go up an organisation, the less likely there is to be someone who publicly, openly identifies as being disabled. And part of that is because there just aren't enough people who have reached that stage. But part of it as well is about senior leaders who have a non-visible disability, or maybe a mental health condition, talking about that openly and making it feel safe for others to talk about the support they need. So there's this really great campaign that the Barclays started actually, and the Lord Mayor's Appeal has taken on, called This Is Me. And it's just getting people to talk about their whole selves, which includes the fact that they might have a disability or a mental health condition, but that it doesn't completely identify them. And then it just starts to normalize that conversation and make it possible for people to kind of be their whole selves at work. I'm not sure that answers your question, Lisa, but it was an attempt.
It does, and thanks for the segue while I unmuted myself. That was great. It does answer the question. And I do actually want to take this to Neil Smith, who is Inclusive Design Leader at HS2. And I wanted to ask about this question of actually almost physically making places accessible and positive for people with disabilities, because I know there are obviously building regs and so forth, but I'd like to find out how many, percentage-wise you think are working, and what needs to happen next.
Thank you, Lisa. I mean, I think one of when I started in this world working in construction, I think we used to talk about, the industry used to talk about designing for the disabled, and it was other people. It wasn't ourselves. It wasn't, and my journey's been quite easy in some respects, because it's a world that's designed by people that look like me. We don't have the diversity within the workforce, and part of that is we don't have a built environment that supports that. And we've always framed it in a legal framework. Well, we've got the Equality Act. What is reasonable for us to do? Or we frame it in terms of what is the minimum we do to get building control approval. It's actually not what we need to do to actually make it accessible for our workforce and ourselves. I mean, I've had a conversation with quite senior partner of an engineering firm, and he was quite adamant that he had no disabled people in his workforce, whereas actually I think probably over 50% of his workforce were most likely on the spectrum, because of it being engineering. So it is, and we have a real need to stop thinking about it from a regulation point of view, and actually start thinking about it from a business point of view, about how we need to change the way we think about the built environment. So one of the pieces of work that I've been involved in is the Construction Industry Council's Roadmap for Change, and that is about, I'll paste in the web address, because I think that's a toolkit to help the construction industry start to think about how it needs to change. So it reflects the community that it's actually delivering buildings for, and I think that's a critical piece.
Okay, thank you, Neil. I was just going to say to everyone, but I can't really multitask that well. To say to everyone in the audience as well as here, please do share links. You're probably seeing my eyes dart all over the place, for anything that you're finding that's good and useful to other people, even if it's something that, say you think, well, this is for my need or my issue, it could be useful to other people, which is why we've brought all of you together. I wanted to go to Charlotte Morfitt, who works on women in planning and is in a council and so on, but you had a thought about changing culture, which I thought was pretty applicable across the piece.
Yeah, so hi everybody. So part-time I do a PhD, and so I've been doing a lot of academic reading around diversity and inclusion. And the number one thing that comes up that we're not doing enough on is culture change. And I think that really speaks to what we said about inclusion. Diversity is great, but if the culture isn't there to support those people to feel included, then we're not going to get anywhere. And actually Waltham Forest is starting to make some really great moves in this. One of the public practice people there, Alpa, is working with senior leadership on a diversity pledge, not just for actual procurement, but also for pre-app, so that we want to see diverse teams come to us when they present their proposals. It's in very early days at the moment, but I think that's how we push for culture change on the public sector side. But I feel quite guilty, actually. I need to push for culture change in the panels that I get on women in planning. They're definitely all female, but there is not enough diversity otherwise on those panels. So I'm going to think about what I can do on that, actually. You've all made me think, which is good.
I think we can all go home now. We've accomplished one thing. It's enough. Let's just go have a cup of tea. Thank you, Charlotte, for that. It's a really good point to make. And I was going to warn him, but I didn't have time because you were so concise. Hassanil, I'm going to come to you because you're nodding at everything because I think you just agree with a lot of stuff. But you're in an area where you're working with businesses, you're entrepreneurial, and you just, I mean, I know you just get stuff done. What are you experiencing in terms of your work, and how are you able to influence the wide networks that you are involved in?
So I guess I'll start off with a bit of background short. Time myself 5 minutes, so I'm on track. So my background is born and raised on a council estate in a tower block, the usual sort of working class background, second generation that came in. And I'll use our organization as an example of good culture, what I would hope is good culture. So when we look at our organization, they took me out of the job center, and I want to list some practical advice of what our organization has done. We tend to basically look in the unusual places like the job center. We try to remove barriers. So sometimes we think, okay, does this role actually need a degree? Does this role actually need the exact experience? Can there be transferable skills that the candidate has? Has the candidate got the right enthusiasm, the right can-do attitude? And one of the speakers touched on it. We have a supportive environment and culture, peer-to-peer sort of stuff. Everyone helps each other out. There's a lot of collaboration. We try to break down the barriers between teams and the different projects that we do, so that different members of the team can basically get experience and exposure. So then so I guess proof is in the pudding. So when we look at our organization, we're more than 50% female. We're more than 20 to 25% BAME throughout history. The average recruit is about 23 years old. That's just our organization. Our projects have delivered on average 60% plus female founders. So our 19 workspaces, across the 19 co-working spaces that we've created, a majority, more than 60%, have been female founders. 33+% on average across the years have been BAME founders, representing different organizations and interests as well, like SBTV, Word on the Curb, LGBT charities, various types of charitable and for-profit organizations. The average age of a founder is 27 years old. Our charity provides pop-up shops, co-working spaces, and one of the reasons why I think we've been able to achieve that is because we don't focus on who can give us the highest rent, or we don't focus on monetary value. We focus on the ecosystem effectively, who adds value. One of the speakers basically said, when you basically have a diverse set of individuals, you kind of buck the trend. You're above average in terms of ideas, in terms of achievement. And I think as an organization, we've done really well in terms of achievement, because across different industries, we've achieved over 23 national awards. And most of our team, the average age is 20. When we recruit were 23, we didn't have any experience in most of the things we're doing. We're in urban planning and high streets and cutting crime, fighting crime, all sorts of different various things. But none of my teammates, or myself included, had that experience. I went from an intern, and I was just happy to get the experience because I didn't have the relevant experience. There's this cycle where people get trapped where you go into, for example, retail because you're not fortunate enough to get voluntary experience. You don't have the time. You're kind of locked in, or you can't go to university, and it's a bit of a kind of catch-22 sometimes. And a lot of organizations won't look at you if you don't have a degree, won't look at if you don't have the right experience. But what our organization has been able to do is create a supportive environment. I'm not saying most of the team are graduates, don't get me wrong, but a lot of the apprenticeship and internships that we've tried to do over the years have tried to give people an opportunity to get that experience. So within our co-working spaces and hubs, we encouraged all our startups to take on young people, give people experience and opportunity. So when we do pop-up shops, for example, we let people try out businesses on the high street, but we're also thinking, what's different about this business? How can they add value to the high street? So it's always about diversity, and hopefully through the numbers that you heard, like the diversity is the proof in the pudding, and we're still challenging ourselves. Some of my colleagues said we've created a culture, but how do we solidify that culture? Because if people move on, do we lose that culture? How do we effectively institutionalize or make it part of the DNA of the organization? Because people can move on. So we're kind of in the opposite direction. people are starting off with the structural stuff and then trying to create the culture, whereas we've been fortunate and organically grown the right culture, but now we're thinking, how do we secure that across the organization, across teams, and in terms of legacy as well? So, because cultures can change, cultures get created, but they can also change over time as people change over time. So we're trying to secure that now.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point too, and that's actually almost leadership gospel as well. Where if you set the purpose for a company and so forth, it doesn't really matter so much if the people change, because you know where you're going. That's really key. I wanted to ask Jahanara if you can let people know what you do, because when we spoke on the phone, you talked about being able to influence through commissioning and purchasing, and some of the stuff that Hassan was talking about. Let people know where you work and what you're able to do, and suggest others might do.
I think there's a lot that we can do. So my role is so I'm responsible for our community investment, and for a lot of people that might not make any kind of sense, but it's the kind of extra stuff or the additional value stuff that a lot of housing associations commit to. So it's not just the bricks and mortar, but we have a social responsibility to kind of look after the interests of our residents, and a lot of residents who live in social housing come with a lot of social issues. So we focus a lot of our work on sort of leveling the playing field as much as we can for a lot of our residents and our communities. So in terms of diversity in this topic, I think one of the things that I think can get missed and is potentially, we need to kind of keep a focus on is how is all of this affecting the communities that we are serving in all our respective roles. Because when we're talking about, so we're sort of in roles, we're in organizations, we've got jobs, etc., and we're talking about the sort of career and professional challenges. But equally, in a mirror effect, our communities are facing those same things, and they will be the people that will be our future leaders. We want to be the future leaders, and it's the kind of a them and an us view that we need to shift, because they're people just like you and I, and they have aspirations. And how do we give voice to their voice and listen to the same things that affect us and are important to us as part of this conversation? Because I think particularly in housing, there can be a risk sometimes with their residents or their tenants, or it's that community or that estate that we're serving. And with that sort of, if you like, definition, you sort of put them in a box and you carry out your transaction in a certain way. And actually, from my point of view, they're just like you and I, and we just need to be giving them voice and understanding what their lived experience is. So in our organization, we're looking at reviewing and revitalizing our D&I strategy. And I was pleased that I was kind of involved or asked to kind of contribute to what that meant in terms of our work with our communities. So as an example, as many other organizations, we'll all celebrate Black History Month, but it's a month. Or we'll do, Pride, and here's a week of activities that sort of has rainbows and everybody dressing up in rainbow colors. But all of those things are tokenisms. And actually we need to shift away from that. When we're talking about diversity, it's about thinking about how does that become part of our DNA as an organization internally, but also for the communities that we serve. So that's our customers, that's the people that we live side by side with, and thinking beyond our kind of very sort of inward looking approach to all of this. I mean, a lot of the speakers, what they've said, I think I fundamentally agree with. And I just think that it's a real opportunity for all of us here to just think about how we don't lose this momentum, that we're all able to talk about diversity, and the fact that this particular network is a mixed group and it's talking about all sorts of difference is really important. Because as somebody else said earlier, I definitely felt more keenly the fact that I'm a BAME woman, more so than because I'm BAME. It's the combining effect of all of that. And again, thinking about community and the people that we serve, it's that how is the kind of multiple effects sort of affecting them. One of the things we were discussing as part of that D&I approach to our communities was the prejudice that we can almost unconsciously form about particular communities that we serve. So I know that there are certain communities in London which will have a high proportion of Black people or BAME people, and our colleagues we'll treat them differently. The sort of, the level of standard of service, we can almost kind of, put in the side because, you know what, they're a sort of a slightly lower customer base for us to be serving. And it's those things that might sound really controversial, but it's the truth. And we just need to recognize that. And again, I'm just borrowing off a colleague, but I think this is an opportunity for me, for all of us to get comfortable with being uncomfortable with all of these topics and think about what does it mean in terms of the actions that we can individually and collaboratively take together.
Thanks, Johanna. I think this question of sort of what's the standard and how do we help people and bring them forward, that's one of the things that this new program, Emerging Talent, is about, diversifying the pool, but also giving people tools to come up and build skills so that it's about all the different things we are as individuals, plus the skills we bring to the job. It's just housing for now, but we'll see what happens. I wanted to ask Anita, most of the people in this audience will know what that means, but you brought up a point about diversity characteristics. Do you want to explain what that's about and why you think it's an issue that we need to address?
Diversity characteristics in the chat, do you mean? Yeah. So I was basically saying that I think Marcia asked the question of she's struggles to find networking easy or for it to come naturally perhaps when she's the only BAME in the room. And I've found that throughout my career, I'm pretty much always the only BAME in the room. It's Manchester often with, you aim to go to events where there are more senior people, so it just so happens to be that way. And often you're the only female in the room. And when I started off, I found that very difficult. And I found that sometimes more senior people wouldn't necessarily want to talk to you, or to think, oh, she's just a token person that somebody's brought along. But what I learned over time, and actually it was from somebody from a BAME background who was more senior in an organisation I worked in at the time, said to me, don't think of it as a negative. What you need to realise is that because you're physically different, people are more likely to remember you. And my God, was it true? And I think that's helped me so much in my career now, as over time, you keep showing up, your face is there a lot. Those people remember you, they'll remember your name because it's different. And I think we need to not be afraid to use that. So I think that's probably my advice there.
I think it's a really good point. It's about stepping up as well. Now, Leona, you had answered a question about this a little bit earlier about culture and how it changes and who's in the room and so forth. Do you want to sort of comment on what Anita has just said about changing it? Also, in terms of Marcia, who wrote in saying, I feel alone, you run a network, don't you?
Sorry, school go error. So yeah, I co-chair a BAME network across social housing called Unifi. And Unifi was founded by 5 G15 housing sector BAME networks from within those internal organizations. And I think it plays to the point you've just mentioned around kind of feeling very alone when you're trying to navigate and not really knowing where those paths are, and not feeling like there was a real safe space where you could go and have conversations about your career or about your organization or about how you was feeling. So Unifi was set up to fundamentally, first of all, just to kind of have that safe space and start having conversations. And it's evolved, excuse me. It's no longer just a G15 network, and it's no longer just London centric. It is a nationwide network. And what we're trying to do is that we have these kind of different pillars that we recognize are necessary to help us progress as a group. And one of those is fundamentally around networking with other people. So I also noticed that in the link, someone had mentioned BPIC, who is another group that we're beginning to collaborate with. And what we find is that people will share information about networking opportunities across the group, so that actually when you do attend these things, potentially you're not on your own. And also just to know where those networking events are taking place, because I think one of the things that we experience is not being part of those conversations culturally within organizations about what's kind of taking place and when. So if you're kind of not at the top table, or you don't have access to that top table, you wouldn't necessarily know where those networking events are taking place and what the purpose of them are. So there is no blueprint that kind of helps people. And I think the other thing is around what I talked about was kind of the structure and the culture of our organizations. We have a moment in time now where we can actually look at it, and it's not about, you know, I think holding people to blame or account. I think it's about saying, actually, what do we want our organizations to represent going forward into the future? And that as a fundamental part of that, we have to look at diversifying the top table so that we get diversity of thought, because at the moment what you're being benchmarked against as a person of color is what's already in the room, and that kind of leads to this kind of deficit model where it's a homogenous view that everybody needs something extra or has to work harder. And I think if you don't change those structural and cultural environments, then actually just having networking events and having people not be the only person in the room isn't fundamentally going to change it for the society. It's going to change it for those individuals, but I think what we need is change on a wider spread.
Thanks for that, Leona. I think there's so many points coming out of this. I want to get to engagement quite soon, and I'm going to go to Anyeka and actually back to Seth and Akil for that. But on your point about being the only one there and who are we measuring against and so forth, I want to go to Becky Utuka. She's actually, if we work this out properly, she'll probably wrap us up as well. But you're on Leadership 2025 with Jahanara, and that's kind of meant to help, I guess, change some of that. Can you talk a bit about that and whether it has potential to go beyond housing?
Okay, so happy to share what happens on Leadership 2025 with everybody. I found it personally very useful, similar to what Leona has just explained. It gives us as leaders that space to express ourselves, good and bad, frustrations. We learn from each other. It's unique. Every time we finish our learning sets, some of which run a full day or half day, we all come back in a reflective mode, realizing that the challenges that we face are actually similar. But as a leader, when you're alone and you're not confident in sharing your challenges with somebody, you can feel isolated. And that can begin to affect the way you lead, can begin to affect your confidence. But having that safe space, and more importantly, having people who you share background with, share the same challenges with outside of work, you know, it begins to build that confidence that actually I'm not alone. You know, these are natural things that might happen. Some of them might be barriers, but this is how we can break them. So I think in addition to Leadership 2025 empowering us as leaders academically, as Kate also mentioned, we link up with Rofi Park. The difference or the additional side is having that cohort of friendship, you know, people who share your burden, people who you can identify with and help improve your leadership style. I think the other thing that it does for us is raising our profile. So again, we've heard about how BAME is underrepresented in the sector, especially in housing. I mean, 17%, as Altair have said in their recent research, 17% of the housing sector residents are BAME. And yet when we look at our leadership structures as they stand now, we've only got 4% BAME representation. So there's something going on there that's not right. And I think Leadership 2025 is doing a fantastic job in, you know, shifting that. But I'll also touch on some of the comments made earlier that all of these programs can be created, but the burden should not be put on the BAME leaders only. There needs to be a cultural shift in people's minds. Otherwise, there's an imbalance of BAME carrying this burden and the dominant, you know, culture just carrying us known as normal. So it needs to be balanced. Yeah.
I hear that, and I think this idea that it has to be everyone's responsibility. One of the people in the chat, you may see Gavin coming up, and Gareth is coming up too. There are, I'm guessing by the names, and I know a couple of them, some white men who are moving up through public service and private service. Good that you're here, and it's important that this is an alliance that spreads beyond any individual need or group or anything like that, and that we can kind of involve everyone in it. You talked about networks too. I mean, one of the people who I think is in the audience here or on YouTube today is Jacqueline Bleicher. She's gone through our presentation coaching. She's amazing. She's a designer, urban designer. It's not just about networks for, you know, social and getting together. It's work, you know, trying to get in with a council. I mean, you know, Seth and Charlotte and Akil will know this. You need to know people. It's not quite like business and old boys club, but you have to know people. And if you're not in there, it's really, really difficult. Now, I'm going to go to Anyeka. I'm feeling bad for her because I've had you sort of on my list to go to for like, I don't know, 6 minutes with all kinds of different topics. So you could kind of pick what you wanted to talk about, but let people know what you do, and then over to you.
Yeah, of course. So I'm the Strategic Engagement Manager for the London Office of Tech and Innovation, which is LOTI. And we help boroughs to collaborate on digital and data to bring and deliver real world outcomes for Londoners. And I guess there have been some really interesting conversations that have been had, but I think one of the most interesting is around sort of affecting culture change. And one of the things that we did that was subconscious actually, but has now become a very conscious effort, is around working around existing cultures and structures within local authorities. I think everyone has noted that the further up you go, the more white and male that it becomes. And that is unfortunately the climate and the environment we deal with. So what we did was worked around it. We tried to deal with the subject matter experts, and in doing so, that tended to be sort of those that worked on a more operational level and tended to be a more diverse group of people. And as a result, we pulled on their talent and their expertise as well as their life experiences in order to enrich the projects that we've been able to deliver. And as a result of that, actually what we've done is acknowledge the differences and diversity within these groups, but also celebrate their input. And the knock-on effect is that their voices are included, but also the agenda is reshaped, because getting broader voices makes you think more laterally and wider around the issue than just the same people discussing the same thing. So that's sort of how we've done it on a more subconscious level. But on a conscious level, we've also invested a lot in digital leadership. So we pledged to recruit 100 digital apprentices across our member boroughs, and in an effort to do so, we're hoping to build the digital skills pipeline and hopefully over time make the sector a little bit more diverse.
That I think those concrete actions are really, really important, and it's good to hear. So that's one where maybe afterwards in the write-up, if we could direct people to the site to find out about those apprenticeships. I mean, on LinkedIn, I know you're all on LinkedIn, and afterwards we'll share people's just LinkedIn addresses if that's okay. The fact that, you know, share jobs, share opportunities, even if it's not for you. I'm a big fan of STEMettes, science and tech for young girls. That kind of stuff is all shareable. It doesn't matter. I share BAME things. Everything is shareable, and somebody will benefit from it. So I think it's really worth doing. I wanted to actually, I mean, you've talked about making space for people. I did want to talk about engaging people and bringing them into, in our case, in this group, urban issues, housing regeneration and so forth. And I wanted to go back, Seth, Akil, you're next to each other on my screen. You decide who speaks, but what are you doing in terms of working with, you're looking at each other too, about creativity. How are you engaging with young people to get them involved in placemaking, people who might not be otherwise involved? No, neither of them. There we go.
Yeah, I mean, I can start and then Akil can chime in. I guess, so there's kind of twofold to this in our work. I think in the last year or so, we've developed a more kind of close relationship with local authorities to do direct engagement. So around specific projects, we'll be working with the design team to think about community engagement and social value. But the reason why we've got into that field is because a lot of the spaces that we were creating and a lot of the approaches that we had to just kind of to challenges within the built environment, but using our own resources, they were quite useful ways of engaging young people within the broad challenges that we have, without engaging with people around a specific development or a specific issue. So we had quite a creative way of thinking about how we use our space, thinking about how we use our town centres, thinking about kind of how we actually think about how we interact, how we relate to our cities and how we interact with our cities at a broad scale. So then we started to kind of think about how we can use those same methods to council projects, to kind of more straightforward engagement projects. So I think the answer is really to think about these things creatively, to not think about these things as a kind of you need to be involved in this project because we need an outcome. But to think about it as, you know, there is a kind of very broad picture, there's a very broad thing that's happening, which is that the city is changing, and that there are multiple ways that you can kind of view that and get involved in that. Some very creative, some very kind of operational and functional, but by combining all of those things, you can kind of get really creative ways of engaging with young people, and also of valuing their input as well, valuing their knowledge and valuing what they have to say. By kind of giving a more general platform for them to interact with the themes that you want them to interact with.
And then just to quickly kind of add to that as well, once you do that, I feel like that kind of touches on and reflects what's been said a lot about culture change, because in order to genuinely value diverse thought, diverse opinions, like the opinions of young people, and how we change and manifest our kind of urban futures, is to move from community engagement to community resilience. So we're moving from models by which we're engaging and bringing people into pre-existing schemes and pre-existing ideas of where we should go, to kind of allowing those ideas and schemes to be generated by people themselves. And I think truly valuing that kind of is a start. And then once you're able to do that creatively, and you're able to do that and chip away at this kind of existing thing, you end up with a cultural shift. You end up with a shift by which lots of people are doing this on a parallel plane in a sense, and kind of really looking towards how we can work with and for, rather than by kind of just bringing people into something that's already predetermined.
Thank you. I mean, we did a podcast yesterday on community engagement, and one of the topics was, you know, it's that question of when does the community come in and how much are they valued in terms of what gets put into a place. But I think all that's really, really helpful. And again, if we can sort of get you guys to contribute any thoughts after the fact, where people can go and find out what you're doing. On the engagement piece, there was something about new rail stations, a competition for rail stations, and I got up in arms and said, right, who's on this panel of deciding? I wanted to go to Neil, Diane can chip in if you like, about including people with disabilities on design panels and decision-making panels. Are there enough? What should be happening there? Go ahead.
I think that's a really interesting one. Actually, over the years, it's got far worse. You know, when I started out, there are a lot of access groups involved in the planning process and actually helping inform decision-making process. And over the years, that resource has been completely depleted. One of my roles is I sit on the London Legacy Development Corporation's Built Environment Access Panel that came out of 2012. And we actually view every application that goes through the LLDC's planning team. We have input, it's recorded, there are actions coming out of it. And we do influence and change the development that's happening. You know, from a HST perspective, we engage with Network Rail's Built Environment Access Panel as part of our design process. Again, it's not an engagement; it's an involvement with. You know, I think was mentioned earlier. Move away from engagement. Engagement means you ask people questions, they give you an answer, and then you can ignore it. It's actually how do you respond to that? You know, and that means that needs a transparency. We need to. One of the things I think we're not very good at in the world of construction is being transparent. Publish the data. Publish what we're actually doing. And I think that's not just from a client perspective. I think also we need to look at how we encourage the supply chain to engage in that process as well. You know, there's a partnership all the way through, and we need to bring that together.
Great. Diane, you wanted to add something?
So completely agree with Neil, and inclusive design is something we talk about a lot, not just in terms of physical buildings, but also in terms of policies and processes. And Neil, you mentioned Network Rail, and I'm pretty sure they did a piece of work that showed that it's 100 times more expensive to try and retrofit accessibility than it is to build it in the first place. And I think as well that people think about accessible design as being for a few people, but actually if you have things that work, say, for wheelchair users, they are also good for people with a pram or a buggy, or who is carrying a load of stuff, or has a wheelie suitcase, you know, or whatever it is. And I think that there's often a kind of dichotomy between attractive design, if you like, and inclusive design. And I think it's a false one, because if a design isn't inclusive and accessible, it's not good design either. And we also see around sort of policies and processes that if you involve a diverse range of people, and obviously from my perspective thinking about disabled people, in designing those policies and processes, it actually means that you need fewer specific individual adjustments further down the line. You'll always need some, but if you can, as part of your routine process, bake in an approach that involves the widest possible group of people up front, you'll get a much better process, a much better policy, and a much better product.
Thanks for that, Diane. Agreed 100%. I mean, we are in this session, we are really focusing on the built environment and how that gets done. And when you hear from people and how you do it is critical to everything. I wanted to go briefly to Vicky, who is Director of HR, and just kind of think, because you've been listening to this and I've seen you nod a few times, do you find this is giving you tools to help make change within your own organization and your networks? Are you hearing anything that you can use?
Yes, absolutely. And actually, it's given me a little bit of comfort in terms of what we've got in the pipeline, that we're probably going to be on track to see an impact. Because for me, there's a real difference, I think, between the internal and the external world. And actually reading some of the comments, one of the things I did, just linking back to the comments around culture change, you know, we've got some, you know, hearty issues in our DNA, and we know we need to sort of change some of that. So the two initiatives that are internal and they're bespoke to us and our issues are research based. So the training we did, I'm listening, watching the comments around unconscious bias training and diversity training. I wanted to take it a little bit further to actually flick that switch and start really challenging the mindset of everybody under our roof. So the training I've made it mandatory. I've got 150 people through before lockdown hit, so I need to pick it back up. But it was mandatory, and I started with our partners. And that was a 2-hour session, but it was based on research. So someone came in, spoke to our people to really understand our internal issues, and then to hopefully change that mindset, to try and change the culture. So it's not going to change overnight, but flicking that switch and changing that mindset was important to me. You can't just sort of, you know, we needed to look internally before we go outside.
That's a really good point. This is, I mean, so the question I asked all of you on this panel to consider was, what can I do to change things? What am I doing personally in my organization? And also, how can we push? I think we've come to that. I'm not going to ask you each, because just in the interest of time, what you're doing. You're already doing things. It's why you're in this group. And I think I'm certainly grateful to you for everything you're doing. And I'm hoping the people who are watching are too, because this has been a really good learning experience. But again, just before we wrap up, I don't know if she saw it in the chat, I was warning Becky, saying, because Kate from Gateway started and Becky's next gen, I'm going to throw to her next, just to say, have you picked up anything? How are you feeling at the end of this? But I would again encourage this audience who's here. Obviously, you've shown up today, so you do care. Think about, you know, one thing you can do that will make a difference in your life, in your work, in your team. Most of you are already leaders or heading into leadership roles. And then how can we push a little bit harder? The nice thing about this intersectionality, some of you, so Vicky from legal, certainly in terms of disability and regulation, Equalities Acts and so much, there is some hard and fast regulation that can help you. But then there's also the softer stuff, like a useful network and so on. So I think it's a mix of all of that. Becky, I hope that stalled enough for you to gather your thoughts. I'm going to hand over to you. So what's your thinking as we head towards the end of this session? If you picked up anything, how are you feeling?
Yeah, just to add to what you said, which you summarized quite nicely, Lisa, what we've been discussing there. A lot has been said on the call, diversity in all its strands. So it was mentioned that we need every protective characteristic in terms of diversity fails isolated for a reason. And it's about time that we talk about diversity in, you know, its true sense. Of course, this discussion here is about Black BAME sector, but then there's more to it, and we need to recognize that and support these groups. What I've also taken from the discussion here is that a lot has been said and a lot has been done already. We're not looking to reinvent the wheel here, but it sounds as though there's some urgency to the matter. And I certainly have been keeping an eye as well on the social media, and I'm sure most of you have, picking the big pledges being done by organizations on we're going to do this blackout day, you know, some skepticism by their employees, some supporting them. I think we've seen all this before, but what we need to ask ourselves and take away from this is the reason why we are on this call is because we believe something needs to be done, but also it's because we as leaders or colleagues can make that difference. And so it's up to us to continue burning this beacon, to continue the dialogue and keep it where it needs to be. I think all of us will have different reasons, as we've heard in the call, for choosing to support this. For some of us, that it's a business case. For some others, it's productivity. For others, it's just the burning desire to see fairness and, you know, in our communities, equality in our communities. Whatever your reasons, I will summarize by saying that find it and keep supporting this because it's the right thing to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Becky. I mean, that nails it on the head. This is, you know, the reason we've come together in a way now was because of the joint long-term crisis of COVID and the short-term brutality of what happened to George Floyd and then the Black Lives Matter resurgence. As we say, it shouldn't take something like that happening. It shouldn't take anything that has to do with the gay community, any community being attacked to act on these kinds of things. And the fact that all of you, I mean, so those of you who are watching on YouTube, hello, you can't see the chat, do take advantage, go to futureoflondon.org.uk and find out about all the great things that this group is sharing. As I say, if it's okay with everyone, we'll check with you. We'll share your LinkedIn contacts, because again, this is a whole bunch of networks right here that reaches, I'm guessing, I know some of you, we could be reaching into tens of thousands of people in this group alone who are doing great things and know stuff and want to make change. So I'm going to thank all of you very much for joining us. It's been a great discussion. It wasn't sort of a long, deep, meaty thing from each of you, but I think we've kicked off something that's really, really worthwhile and that I hope that we can continue. Again, for your participation, thanks also to our sponsors, Marina, that great chat, and thank you for backing this whole thing with North and NPS Group, L&Q as well. And Future of London is the host. Check out Emerging Talent, that's quite keen. And I'm Lisa Taylor from Coherent and from Future of London. We'll see you in the next Learning from Crisis session at some point in August, I think. Check Future of London events for that. But for now, we are ending a little early because that's okay. Go get a cup of tea, have a fabulous day, and thank you very much, everyone. We'll see you on the website and out in real life. Bye.